Washington Interior Secretary Ryan Zinke, a former Navy SEAL, prides himself on being a follower of the rules, whether it be reviewing previous national monument designations or defending his occasional use of private aircraft for government business. But a military tradition Zinke has revived at Interior Department headquarters in Washington appears to violate the agency's policy for displaying and flying flags. Earlier this month, the Washington Post reported that when Zinke enters the building, a security staffer takes the elevator to the 7th floor, climbs the stairs to the roof and hoists a special secretarial flag. And when he goes home for the day, the flag, light blue and featuring Interior's bison seal and 7 white stars, one for each of the agency bureaus that existed when the flag was adopted, comes down. The problem isn't when Zinke is in the office, as his specialty flag made clear he was Wednesday afternoon, it's when he's gone. If Zinke is away, say, manning the entrance station at Grand Canyon National Park or attending a National Rifle Association conference, a separate flag for Deputy Secretary David Bernhardt is swapped in, as the Washington Post reported. The story even included a photo of the flag for Bernhardt identical to the one for Zinke, but white with blue stars flying above the building. The Interior Department's manual, specifically Part 310, Chapter 5, spells out which flags are allowed to be flown outdoors. At the Secretary's direction, the Secretary's flag may be flown over DOI-controlled buildings in which the Secretary is present. The Deputy Secretary's ceremonial flag, however, is for indoor display only, in the immediate office of the Deputy Secretary, and at official functions and ceremonies at which the Deputy Secretary is the principal speaker. The Interior Department did not respond to HuffPost's request for comment Wednesday. In a statement to the Post earlier this month, however, spokeswoman Heather Swift defended the flag-flying ritual as a major sign of transparency. Ryan Zinke is proud and honored to lead the Department of the Interior, and is restoring honor and tradition to the department, whether it's flying the flag when he is in garrison or restoring traditional access to public lands, she told the publication. Zinke came under fire late last month when, during a speech to an oil industry group, he said, "I got 30% of the crew that's not loyal to the flag." The former Montana congressman's comment was met with outrage, including from a trio of groups representing retired Interior employees, which called the remarks ludicrous and deeply insulting. Voting rights are at the center of a new and nasty attack from the GOP gubernatorial candidate in Virginia. Ed Gillespie is accusing Democrats in the state of jeopardizing public safety by restoring voting rights to former felons who have completed their sentences, a claim the state's governor says is outrageous. Virginia strips felons of their voting rights, but they can be restored by the governor. Virginia Governor Terry McAuliffe, D., has restored the voting rights of more than 168,000 former felons, a number he says is a record high. He's restored all of them individually after the state's Supreme Court ruled in 2016 he could not do so with a blanket order. A new ad from Gillespie accuses McAuliffe and Lieutenant Governor Ralph Northam, the Democratic nominee for governor, of putting public safety at risk by enfranchising Virginians. Last year, Terry McAuliffe and Ralph Northam instituted the automatic restoration of rights for violent felons and sex offenders, making it easier for them to obtain firearms and allowing them to serve on juries, the ad says. It also singles out the case of a man who it says had his rights restored after being found with one of the largest child pornography collections in Virginia's history. The man actually lost his voting rights again after pleading guilty to possession of child pornography and is serving 15 years in prison, according to the Washington Post. Former felons in Virginia have to apply to McAuliffe to have their rights restored and are only considered eligible if they have completed all of their sentencing, including parole. McAuliffe's new process for restoring voting rights does eliminate a step for former felons to regain their gun rights. The ad marks an attack on an issue some Virginia Republicans have supported in the past, though Gillespie appears to be steadfast in his view. In 2013, then-Gov Bob McDonnell, R., took executive action to automatically restore the rights of nonviolent felons. That same year, then Virginia Attorney General Ken Cuccinelli, R., McAuliffe's opponent in the governor's race, was open to the idea after long opposing it. McAuliffe called Gillespie's ad the lowest point yet in his campaign. When our administration began the process of restoring the rights of thousands of former felons who had served their time and returned to their communities, we recognized that we were confronting an historic injustice intended to suppress African American voices, McAuliffe wrote in a HuffPost opinion piece. We also knew that many forces, such as those that led Ed Gillespie to run his latest ad, would oppose our actions vigorously. David Turner, a Northam spokesman, accused Gillespie of lying in the ad and said he should be ashamed. Tammy Hagan, a community organizer with New Virginia Majority, a group that works to restore felons' rights, said allowing people to vote does not pose a safety threat. Hagan had her voting rights restored last year. I'm appalled by the antiquated mentality that seeks to permanently demonize people and withhold the ballot from us. I am a mother, a daughter, a friend, a taxpayer, and a neighbor, she said in a statement. To claim that I shouldn't be able to have a say in who I want on my grandchildren's school board or who I want in office making decisions on my health care is ludicrous and has no bearing on the safety of my community. The ad also highlights the high stakes for voting advocates in the governor's race, which is being watched nationally. While McAuliffe has restored more voting rights than any other governor, he has done it through executive orders, meaning the progress could be quickly undone by an administration hostile to voting rights. Nationally, 6.1 million Americans are disenfranchised because of a felony conviction, according to the Sentencing Project, including 1 in 5 African Americans in Virginia. Right now, the state of felony reenfranchisement lies in the hands of the governor, Tram Nguyen, CO Executive Director of New Virginia Majority, told Think Progress. The entire rights restoration process is on the line with this November election. Judith Brown Dionis, the executive director of the National Office of Advancement Project, said the effort to restrict the vote in Virginia grew out of racism. The right to vote is sacred, and pitting people's fears against access to democracy is reprehensible, she said in a statement. In Virginia, the zeal to restrict the vote is linked inextricably to the state's Jim Crow heritage, and attempts to demonize the right to vote must be condemned in the strongest of terms. Hillary Clinton's presidential campaign and the Democratic National Committee helped fund an opposition research effort against Donald Trump that culminated in numerous damning allegations against him, The Washington Post reported on Tuesday. Trump and his supporters quickly tried to use that revelation to shield the president from the explosive contents of the now famous Steele Dossier, named after Christopher Steele, the former British intelligence agent who compiled the research on Trump's alleged connections to the Russian government. On Wednesday morning, Trump tweeted out a quote from a Fox News commentator who said the Post's report proved the president was a victim. In reality, the provenance of the opposition research doesn't necessarily say anything about what Steele claims to have dug up. And it certainly doesn't prove that the entire affair is phony, as Trump has repeatedly insisted. Furthermore, Republicans were widely reported to have initially funded the anti-Trump file now in question. The Post included that detail in its report on Tuesday, but it was missing from a version the Republican National Committee blasted out. When Trump locked up the GOP primary, the Republican money dried up and Democrats stepped in, another fact that had already been reported. Now we know that some of those funders were aligned with Clinton's campaign and the DNC. Those parties retained Fusion GPS, the firm that had previously been brought on to oversee the contract, and a short time later, Fusion GPS hired Steele. Much of the ensuing controversy over Tuesday's report has focused on accusations that Fusion GPS had orchestrated a smear campaign against a prominent critic of the Russian government who was murdered in 2009, as well as the fact that the firm has pushed back against some GOP-led subpoenas into its Trump work. Trump and his allies are clearly intent on portraying all of this as part of a broader nefarious plot to fabricate a scandal out of whole cloth. But there is nothing particularly unusual about this opposition research effort apart from the severity of the allegations it has produced. Opposition research is a standard and unavoidable part of political campaigning. The search for damaging information can appear desperate at times, so much so that the president's son said it led him to take a highly criticized meeting with a Kremlin-linked lawyer at Trump Tower in New York last summer. It's also a shady business. Opposition research often involves obscure funding sources and the use of dubious investigative practices. That said, it's not uncommon for research dug up during these campaigns to be woven into law enforcement investigations. An FBI probe into the Clinton Foundation last year was reportedly driven in part by information published in a Breitbart editor's book that critics had written off as a hit job. Apparently, FBI officials believed some of the book's charges were worthy of a closer look. Investigators with the FBI and Special Counsel Robert Mueller's team have been far less dismissive of the contents of the Steele Dossier than Trump has. The FBI had reportedly looked to the dossier as a roadmap for its probe into potential collusion between the Trump campaign and Russia, according to a BBC report in March. Just weeks ago, Mueller reportedly questioned Steele as part of his concurrent investigation into the matter. None of this is direct confirmation of the dossier's claims, some of which seem fantastical or downright bizarre. But a number of them also appear credible and consistent with what we've since learned about Russia's attempts to interfere in the 2016 election. As former Clinton campaign spokesman Brian Felon said, if even a portion of the Steele dossier ends up being true, it won't matter who paid for it.